Have we got a great podcast for you today? Welcome to another edition of Spits and Suds. I'm Gavin Spittle of 105.3 The Fan. Hope you are having an awesome summer. The hockey talk never stops on Spits and Suds, and thank you for listening and supporting us. Wow, what a great June we had, and we're so excited to bring you some cool programming in July. And of course, we had to get our friend on starsthoughts.com. I'm going to pull back the curtain for just a second. I feel like we've already done a podcast because what I love about our Spits and Suds correspondents, they're all cool people. So we get in these conversations prior to turning on the microphone, and it's the greatness of Robert Tiffin of starsthoughts.com. How are you, my friend?
Doing good. Let me know next time you're going to pull back the curtain, though. I didn't get my hair done.
Hey, you are a handsome bald man like I am.
Mm-hmm. Is there any other kind, Gavin?
I mean, they say it's in. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I hope so.
It's not working, but they say it's in.
We have to trust them.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So let's go back to the press conference because I thought this was interesting, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So with the announcement of the new Stars head coach, Glen Gulutzan, we had Neil Graham being propped up from Texas to the assistant coach. And then in the press conference, it was mentioned about Alain Nasreddine, and we really hadn't heard much until that point. But Nasreddine fills out the rest of the coaching staff. So Neil Graham, Nasreddine, and to me, Robert, personally, I really like this coaching staff. You know, I hope it works out for Gulutzan, but I do like the people that they have around him. And when I did that coaching deep dive on one of the podcasts, I grew a greater appreciation of what Nasreddine brings to the table. And you actually joined me for that podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Man, it seems like forever ago. So
it does. Yeah.
But yeah, it's such an interesting coaching staff because you have both a mix of experience. Neil Graham is obviously the least veteran of them all, but at the same time, he's been coaching in the organization for 12 years and has been a head coach for quite a while himself. So it's not exactly like, in fact, it's about as opposite as it could be to Gulutzan's first time around, where he admitted he knew one way to play hockey and he was figuring things out kind of as he went. This time around, everyone's kind of figured things out in multiple places. Nasreddine in particular, like you say, has been coaching here, has figured out a lot of really good things, especially with the penalty kill and working with the defensive group in a Pete DeBoer system. And now we're going to get to see, I mean, Gulutzan said it in that press conference you mentioned, it's going to be collaborative. He very much made it clear he's not trying to bring in one signature system and impose it on their roster. He wants to find a way to tailor the things they do well to the roster that they have. And I think in a perfect world, that's what you want, right? I mean, that's ideally what you want is the system matches the players. But also he said he doesn't want to change too much because obviously the team's been doing so well the last few years. So I don't know what that, balance is between what you change and what you keep the same. I'm sure the first time there are any hiccups, people are going to compare Gulutzan or even Nasreddine under Gulutzan to the defense or the penalty kill under DeBoer, and people will give credit or blame accordingly.
So I was trying to think of this like in a real life scenario, because when you look at this coaching staff, and I do agree with you, I love what Gulutzan said about this is like a partnership basically, because you have Neil Graham underneath him who wanted that Dallas Stars job. You have Nasreddine who also wanted the Stars job, who was formerly with Pete DeBoer. But then I look and I'm like, okay, Neil Graham was a longtime assistant, so he gets it. Nasreddine has actually experience with this, with New Jersey being an interim coach, and then the Hines leaves, so he's interim coach. In comes, I believe, Lindy Ruff, and he stayed on staff. So I find it interesting because sometimes you wonder, like, okay, is this going to work out? Because they all three wanted that same position, but he's also surrounded himself with people with a lot of experience.
It's kind of, you wouldn't see this too often, I think, where it could work. Anyone who's worked in any workplace knows it can be tough to kind of interview for the same position as a peer, and then you become their boss. How do you avoid resentment and jealousy and things like that? In this case, look, Alain Nasreddine, I'm far from the first person to say this, but if you can't get along with Alain Nasreddine, then you probably can't get along with anyone. He's very well liked, always, always upbeat, in a good mood. I've never heard a single bad word about the guy. I'm sure he's human and everything, and stress does things, and it's easier to be well liked when you're the assistant rather than being the one with whom the buck stops. But still, Nasreddine has a very, very good reputation in that sense, as does Gulutzan. Everyone kind of, Jim Nill mentioned specifically character, right? That he sees Gulutzan as being a very high character guy. And Gulutzan expressed a lot of that humility and everything in the press conference. And as for Neil Graham, yes, he interviewed for the job. At the same time, I have to think that one of the reasons he took this job as an assistant with Dallas, because we know that he even mentioned that he's spoken to other NHL teams at different points recently and in the past. So if you're Neil Graham, I really do think you have to look at this as just about the most ideal assistant coach position you could get. Because yes, I'm sure he's confident and feels like he could take that job if he get a chance, just like Gulutzan did way back when. But this is kind of ideal because you get to take that next step. You get that kind of those extra skins on the wall, being an assistant coach in the NHL, so that if you do want to get your shot, maybe in a couple of years, if things are going well, Gulutzan is still around, and Graham wants to go somewhere else, then he's got that extra little bit on his resume to help him do that. So yes, he interviewed for the same job, but even in Neil Graham's case, I have to think he sees this as only really, really a positive for him long term. And he's also, a fair bit younger than those guys too. So Neil Graham has a long coaching career ahead of him, I would certainly say, based on what we've seen so far. And this is a great opportunity for him. And not to mention Jeff Reese as well, who's been there a long time, is also a very, very well liked guy, easy to get along with. So yeah, it should be a very, we'll see if it works, right? If they're
Yeah.
not winning, then no one cares how how well they get along. But just the feeling should be all really good right now, and it seems like they are. So that's as good a sign as you can ask for in July.
So some Spits and Suds listeners might have picked up on this, is that in various interviews, saw him on NHL Network, obviously the press conference, Glen Gulutzan is saying, we just got to get that extra degree. We just got to get that extra degree.
Yeah.
Robert, you're a real smart guy, so I think you know where the extra degree comes from. Rather than, some people will say like 110%, but just for those that don't know, I just wanted to point it out. It's a book by Sam Parker, How to Achieve Results Beyond Your Wildest Expectations. And basically, it's a mindset of doing a little bit extra, and it's amazing what kind of impact that little extra. And why it's called the extra degree is the book's called 212, the extra degree. So I'm going to explain it real quickly. At 211 degrees, water is hot. That extra degree at 212 degrees, water boils. With boiling water comes steam. With steam, you can power a train. One extra degree makes all the difference. So I think I actually had a staff meeting in which I went over this a few years back and talked about that extra degree. So I think it's a much simpler, because throughout our whole life, Robert, we've heard, give 110%, what else can you give me? But just that little bit extra from that book. And I don't know if anyone had ever heard of that, but I love the mindset change that Gulutzan said, just need that extra degree. And I'm like, oh, wow. All right. I know where he's getting that from.
Well, I think it's always good if you have a coach who's trying to learn and trying to get better and reading books like that to get ideas from. And it sounds like he wants to hear ideas from his staff too. Um, I, it seems, again, just the perspective we have in the time we have right now, not having actually seen how any of this is going to work out on the ice.
Correct.
It all makes sense, right? It's very logical because they have been really close. They've gotten there three years in a row. They've been in the Final Four. And so, yeah, you don't want to, it's not a blow it up situation. I think that's what Jim Nill said. It's not a blow it up situation, which, I'm sure there are some fans who think that's exactly what they need, and they need to change everything, change their approach, change their system, change their roster. But realistically, with this roster and the no move clauses and everything they have, that's not happening. So it makes sense to me that you would say, you know what, let's just find a way to, get that extra degree, find that extra gear to just get a little bit farther. And Gulutzan was very, very clear that there's some specific tactical stuff he's not going to divulge, which, makes a lot of sense for his sake. You don't want to kind of forearm the enemy. But it makes sense also that he's not trying to reinvent the wheel here. The Stars have a really good roster. We've said this before. They really do have a really, really good roster.
They do. Yeah.
It may not be perfect. You may want it to look exactly like the Florida Panthers. And it doesn't, and that everyone agrees with that. But they've got so many good pieces. So I love that concept. I guess I'll have to read the book now to actually pretend to be as smart as you seem to think I am, because the concept sounds great. I've read some other really helpful business books, but that one hasn't made it across my desk. So
I just didn't know if I'm sure there were listeners out there that probably said, what do you mean by that extra degree? And since he said it a couple of times, I'm like, he has to be talking about this book. Yeah. So it is fascinating how 1 degree can basically power a train. Just that little bit extra. Okay, moving on.
Wait, one last thing on that. One last thing. I want to pause on that just really quickly, because how do you think you get that extra degree? Do you think that he's going to try to do that tactically? Because I think that's a Pete DeBoer approach for the most part. Is tactics. He's a very smart coach. His systems, everyone has a lot of respect for a Pete DeBoer system, and they know that his teams are going to be well coached. My hunch, and I wrote about this a little while ago, my hunch is that Gulutzan is looking more at a motivational thing. Yes, he's going to tweak some of the systems. He said this, but I think if athletes feel more positive results from certain types of the system, or they feel like they have better alternatives, if one thing isn't working, they know, okay, in this approach we have as a team, we can try different things. I think that can kind of avoid some of that stale feeling that I think we saw, especially in the Edmonton series, where it seemed like the team just, I don't want to say give up. They certainly weren't giving up. They were leaving it all out there, but Edmonton was just outplaying them. And it's demoralizing, right? When you come back exhausted and you feel like you're trying things that aren't working. And I think even even Duchesne might have said this too, that they were trying a lot of the same things and they weren't working. To me, that 1 degree is a kind of combination of tactics and motivation. But really, you want these world-class athletes feeling confident and feeling like they can actually execute better, and that kind of builds on itself. So, how you do that, it'll be interesting to see. Proof will be in the pudding. But to me, it has to kind of start more with that motivational, that buy-in piece, as opposed to just, we have better tactics and we're going to be faster than the other team. I think it has to start from a more character-driven place, I guess I would say.
And I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you for that. The other thing that, 2 things, and they're more generic points, and they'd have to be fine-tuned. One of the things that Sean and I have talked about the past few years when he joins us is the starts, the inconsistency as far as the starts. And I think that is something that the extra degree might be able to fix. Like, listen, we're going to lose games, but we have to be more consistent as a team. Because watching Stars games over the past years, it's like if they did happen to have a fast start, then they have a down second period. And the game will ebb and flow, but I just think I think he probably wants more consistency on a regular basis. So that would be one thing that I think they could fix. But yeah, I think it's more tactical as far as, and then I've also noticed that the message has been received as far as being a more physical team. And I like how he described physicality, how he's saying that doesn't mean we drop the gloves.
They're not going to, I think he said, we're not going to run around chasing guys trying to lay hits.
Yeah, they don't have the personnel to do that, in my opinion. But I do think if they could work on their corner work, that's one thing I felt as though, specifically in the playoffs, super specifically against Edmonton, losing a lot of corner battles that kept the puck in the zone. I think they can do a better job of that. So I'm interested to see what changes they make as far as that as well. Making sure that if you can't get the puck out, at least you're tying the puck up. Man, it's a great question, and I don't know if we have the answer right now. But I will say this, Robert. Brian Schottenheimer has won the offseason for the Cowboys. And no doubt, Glen Gulutzan early, people are like, okay, all right. I mean, both these guys can talk. And there is something to be said about sitting up there and listening to a coach. And when the coach has passion, I think all of a sudden the fan base is like, all right, ultimately wins and losses decides this, but I'm willing to, you're more open going into the season. All of a sudden the retread talk has, gone down.
Yeah, I think they did need something to be fresh. Again, we may never know, the whole story of why Jim Nill was so convinced that they needed to make this change now. But it did seem clear that something did need to change. And this, as always it seems to be the case, the coaching change is the easiest thing to do, or the easiest big change to make. And so yeah, there's a good energy around the team right now. It feels both fresh, but not completely like they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So again, it's a tough thing to do, to try to change things without taking a step backward. That I'll give Jim Nill some credit for saying that too. He was very clear after free agency that they weren't trying to make so many big changes that they accidentally took a step backward, because that is also very easy to do. And I guarantee you we'll see a couple of teams this year who their GMs are assuming, okay, we did that well last year and I made some changes, so we'll do that well plus the increment added by whatever we did this year. And instead, some of those teams are going to move backwards. I mean, just ask Nashville. It can happen, and you don't always see it coming. So we'll see how it works out for the Stars. But right now the vibes are very positive.
Jim Nill is very quiet when he is working on deals. Amazing. Nothing really slips out. You guys do such an amazing job trying to get something to slip out. But in your opinion, do you think they're done? Because I'm curious about addressing the decor and how they're going to do it. Obviously, they have to alleviate some salary cap, but the decor is fascinating to me because they're going into the season, and I'm trying to think, okay, that second pairing. Well, A, do you separate Heiskanen and Harley? And B, if so, what does that second pairing look like?
Yeah. I do think that I still think plan A is to move Dumba. I think they're confident that they can trade him, even if they have to retain a little bit of salary on Dumba to make that move a little easier. I think they still figured that'll be better for the cap than a buyout would, where they still have to retain a bit on the cap for this year and next year. Not to mention pay him to go away. Whereas if they can actually trade him and just retain a little bit, that financially and cap wise makes more sense for them. So I think that's still plan A. Here's the thing, with as quiet as Jim Nill usually is, like you said, the Jason Robertson talk has been really interesting to me. It has been out there. His name has absolutely, multiple people all over the place have been reporting that they're hearing these talks are out there. There was trade. Now, oh wait, they don't think the Stars want to trade him. So if you were to just purely go off of kind of what's out there in public, I think you could at least hypothesize that the Stars were trying to kind of signal to Jason Robertson that they would be willing to trade him if the number that he wants for an extension, since he's eligible to sign an extension now, that if he asks for too much, that they would then choose to trade him, and he wouldn't have as much control over where he goes if they do that. So there's part of me that has wondered, again, I do not know this, no one has told me this, but there's part of me that has wondered if one of the reasons we've heard a little bit more about Jason Robertson's name being out there than we usually do about big Jim Nill type trades, is because it's just a little bit of the cat and mouse game with a big high dollar extension like this, especially considering how much, I think the word I kept hearing was grind, how much of a grind it was to sign Robertson the first time a couple of years ago when he missed training camp in the preseason and everything, and then went on to have an outstanding season, as we all know. But I do wonder about that. So I don't think they're done. I wondered if they had some interest in Brent Burns, who we saw sign.
I was wondering that too.
Yeah, he signed basically the Jamie Benn deal,
Yeah.
almost identically. I think he might have had one extra million worth of incentives on top of that or something like that. But yeah, he signed that 1 million plus performance bonus deal. If Burns can kill penalties, so to me, even if they had to move Lyubushkin to make it work, I wonder if that. I don't think they want to move Lyubushkin. I think they saw last year he's a useful piece, but I do wonder if you can make an upgrade. And I think Brent Burns at 40 is probably still an upgrade, although I'd be careful about how many minutes you play him, and I might, he's got that Ironman streak going on, so you can't really rest him or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do wonder if they had interest in him, because he would solve a lot of issues for you, and I think his size, he's a righty. I think they would see him as an upgrade to Lyubushkin. So I wonder if that's a move that they looked at too, even though he obviously chose to sign with Colorado.
Yeah, which is kind of fascinating because I believe he still has that 420-acre ranch in Texas.
He does. He does. That's right.
So
yeah, I just wonder, because they had tried to get him whenever he who was it? I think it was San Jose traded him to
Yeah.
Carolina
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago. I had heard that Dallas was interested way back then. So who wouldn't be, especially at the time, right? This is a former Norris Trophy winner. But I wonder. I don't know that for sure, but I do wonder if that's a player that you know there are still things out there, I guess is my point.
Sure.
I don't. I think they're still open to making moves. Obviously, the money is something they have to do, but by waiting with Dumba, now they don't have to, pay the buyout and just kind of saddle themselves with that cap hit for this year and next year. They can wait and see what other deals are out there, and then maybe they can end up moving him either a team that really wants him or needs to get to the cap floor or something like that, or as part of a bigger move if that should happen. And again, the Jason Robertson thing could be part of that. If the Robertson camp comes back and says we want a Mikko Rantanen deal, I have a hard time believing the Stars are going to jump at signing him to a $12 million 8-year extension. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting.
I feel old when I make this announcement because I feel like it was just yesterday that I was watching number 17 of the Dallas Stars, Toby Petersen, skating around at the AAC. And I always liked Toby Petersen. I always felt as though he wasn't Stu Barnes, but he did a lot of the little things, and he was a smaller guy. And I rooted for him. One of my favorite all time, no one remembers Stars is Chris Connor. I don't know if you remember Chris Connor.
What did he wear? 65 or something like
that? Yeah. And he had to be like 5'8", 5'9".
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If soaking wet and standing on an apple box, maybe.
Yeah. And I remember he was out there and Mike Modano was playing, and it's just like, I'm like, wow. And he used to tear up the AHL and would come up, and I'm like, man, my guy Connor, because I just root for those little guys. So number 17 is now your head coach of the Texas Stars. Petersen, the last 2 seasons, been with the Avalanche as a skills coach. But prior to that, he does have coaching experience. He was with Lake Erie, Cleveland, when they won the Calder Cup. He was with the Rochester Americans, and he has had great success with power play. So really interesting hire. I will tell people, because some might be wondering about their assistants. They are coming back. So Travis Morin, former Dallas and Texas Star, Max Fortunas, they will be the assistant coaches. Ryan Daniels, the goaltender, development coach, Josh Johnson will all return. So just like the Dallas Stars, the Texas Stars basically fill the head coaching vacancy. I'm always fascinated how these head coaches basically come into situations and their assistant coaches are already picked for them. So why is it interesting to Spits and Suds listeners? Well, because Neil Graham did such a good job as far as, and his staff, of course, developing the young talent, the Robertsons, the Borks, the Stankovens, Jake Ottinger. You look at the Harley is another one. You look at the current Stars players, and those players were under Neil Graham. So, the future, what's going to happen, and we'll talk to Robert about the Stars development camp in just a second. But I thought it was a fascinating article and fascinating hire as well, because I'm interested if Jim Nill maybe sees something in Toby Petersen as a future head coach.
Yeah, this is a classic example. I think your buddy Stephen Meserve wrote about this earlier today, maybe even this morning, and he talked about, I think maybe Sean Shapiro's talked about this too, but Stephen talked about how there are kind of different categories, different types of hires, and one of the types of AHL head coach hire, sometimes it's just a natural promotion from the ECHL, like it was for Neil Graham, where they moved him up from the ECHL as a head coach to an assistant coach briefly, and then he ended up having to take over sooner than planned, but has done, like you say, a great job. The first job as an AHL coach is to develop players. The second job is to win. But in Texas, they take that second part of the job very, very seriously, and they've obviously done a great job of it, even as recently as this year when they made it to the Western Conference Finals themselves, going up against a stacked Abbotsford team with tons and tons of former NHL players.
Yes.
And they took them deep. Yeah, it's this hire seems pretty clearly to me a go down to come right back up. This is a Toby Petersen has never been a head coach before, but he's been, like you mentioned, and he's been coaching at the NHL level on a good Avalanche team for a couple of years. So he's worked, with players with big egos. A skills coach players want to get better. They want to learn. And if you're a skills coach talking to Nathan McKinnon or Val Nichushkin or someone and you don't know what you're talking about, they're going to tune you out real fast. So the fact that he was there for a couple of years kind of shows you that they thought they were learning from him. So this is a chance for him to get a head coaching. At least I read this as a chance for him to get a head coaching bit of experience on his resume that then would make him more attractive as a potential NHL, at least assistant coach, but maybe even, because he was a skills coach, which isn't quite the same thing as like a full on bench coach, assistant coach or something like that. But yeah, this will be a chance, however long he's there, to really add to his resume in an important way. And you saw with Gulutzan too, who he kind of jumped that a little bit, and he mentioned that he probably wasn't ready for that first hire in Dallas. So going up to the NHL and being an assistant was really good for him. So I think this likewise, Toby Petersen, who we love, I think you mentioned he won a Calder Cup. He was on his last year of hockey before I think he had a career-ending injury early in the playoffs with the Texas Stars in 2014. He won a Calder Cup with them. He played with Curtis McKenzie. So they were teammates, and now he's coming back. He played with Fortunas and Morin for that matter too. So he's going to be all three of those guys he played with, and now he's going to be their coach. He played for Glen Gulutzan even back both in Texas and on the Dallas Stars as well. Back when Gulutzan was a head coach in Texas and in Dallas. So there's a lot of organizational connections. My personal Toby Petersen memory was kind of from that Gulutzan time, that kind of bankruptcy era of the Stars. He played a little bit before then, after he signed with them, I think in 07, 08, but for the most part, he got the bulk of his games in that kind of Mark Crawford and Glen Gulutzan time. And he even, in different times when the Stars were really hurting for power play quarterbacks, this was kind of post Zubov and pre Klingberg. Toby Petersen quarterbacked that power play a few times, which is pretty rare to see a forward do, especially a forward who was out of the NHL for a good 4 or 5 years before he finally made it back up. So it's a cool story. Toby Petersen's a really well liked guy. Even an especially cool part of his story is that he's a diabetic. So he just having to deal with that and monitoring blood sugar and everything like that as an NHL player, taking big hits and everything. Especially back then when technology, 20 years ago, when he was playing in the NHL, was a little bit different. So his story is really cool, really easy guy to root for, and obviously he's really familiar with the organization, and especially a few of the guys still there in Texas. So it should be pretty fascinating to see how it works out. But the hire really makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I love that they're bringing in new people into the organization with new, fresh ideas, and I love that they're keeping the staff around as well so they can continue to build on what they've already done in Texas. And thanks for shouting out Stephen Meserve. He's terrific at 100 Degree Hockey. We'll probably have Stephen on to talk about this. 100degreehockey.com. Terrific deep dive into the Texas Stars. He does such a great job. All right, you were at Stars development camp, and so cool that they allow the crowd to come in and watch this. I think it's a great way for people to see the future. And you have some great articles up as well at starsthoughts.com. Tate and Trey Taylor, brothers and defense partners in college, and now at Stars Development Camp. I thought that was really, really cool. That's a great story. So tell us some of the players that you felt stood out. I did hear from one Spits and Suds listener that was there, and they commented on Cameron Schmidt. Wow, he can really skate fast, and they were really impressed by Emil Hemming.
Before I forget, before we dive into the players, I do want to shout out Ryan Daniels, the goaltending. I think his official title is goaltending development coach for the Texas Stars. So this year was a little bit unique because of how deep in the playoffs the Texas Stars went. I had kind of heard that the plan was not to ask any of the Texas Stars coaches to then come off that long season, long playoff run, and then immediately, hey, come run full days of development camp for a week too. So in the past, you'd see people like Neil Graham there, helping coach development camp. This year, Ryan Daniels was there, but the plan wasn't for him to be there either. From what I had heard, they kind of gave him complete license to take the week off. But because he just enjoys it and wanted to help out, he chose to be there anyway. So that's just kind of the type of people you tend to have at a camp like that. Jordy Ben was there. Rich Peverly was around. There, even Jeff Reese was stopping by. It's the off season, but he's still there a little bit. it was really, really cool to see all the people behind the scenes. I even wrote about a couple of the coaches they brought in from outside the Stars organization. Brittany Smith, who's a head coach of the hockey program at Syracuse, and Joe Frazier, who's a longtime assistant to actually Willie Desjardins of the Medicine Hat Tigers, and former Texas Stars head coach Willie Desjardins. So there are a lot of cool connections, and development camp, there's just this extra energy there because everyone who's there is really excited to be there, really wants to be there, both from the coaches but especially the players end. So yeah, you'd mentioned Cameron Schmidt. That's a good place to start. So he absolutely pops. His skating, you can see it in person. I mean, we all heard after the draft. I can't remember if it was you and David or Sean or whoever talked about it, or maybe we did. I honestly can't remember. It's been a whirlwind. But yeah, he is a really, really good skater. They had some just like basic skating drills where they're kind of going through some skills that you don't necessarily see junior hockey players using as much. Um, and they just looked a lot easier for Schmidt than they did for some of the, let's say some of the bigger defensemen, who aren't used to necessarily having to open up in quite the same ways with their blades that Schmidt was doing. But yeah, his shot too. They did some drills where they kind of put the nets on the, against the boards to make a really like short kind of mini contained little couple of mini games that can all happen on the ice at the same time, like just in one zone. And Schmidt was really, you could see how his size, especially in the offensive zone, could be really, really deadly. He can just hit little gaps with speed and explode through them and get shots off. He has a fantastic shot. So he's a player that absolutely was very easy to notice. It's also easy to notice that he is smaller than pretty much
Yeah.
every other player out there. It's hard not to notice that. And that's, Joe McDonnell said that after they drafted him. But again, how many times have we said it, right? The Stars drafted Jason Robertson. He was too slow. Is he ever going to make it? Well, I think Jason Robertson's going to do well in the NHL. Logan Stankoven, he was pretty small. Is he ever going to succeed? I think Logan Stankoven's going to succeed in the NHL now that he just signed a $50 million contract or whatever it is. So, for my money, I don't see a reason to doubt Cameron Schmidt at this point because he's in the right organization to develop a player with a lot of foundational skills and even some elite ones, who just has to overcome this one thing. But that'll be up to him, as it always is. We saw with other players like Julius Honka that sometimes, if you can have elite skill, but if you're undersized and you can't learn and take those next steps in the best ways, then you're going to struggle. It's going to be tough for you. So ultimately, I think it will be up to Cameron Schmidt to see if he can succeed. Do you want to talk about some other players?
Yeah, no, go. I love this.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I'm
Absolutely love
just going on and on, but it was a lot of fun. So another player for me, and I actually hadn't gotten to see him really in person. I didn't even get to see him at development camp last year. Emil Hemming, another Stars first round pick. Man, he looks confident. He looks really good. You can see why he went in the first round. It's so funny. There's some confirmation bias with some of the players, right? Like Schmidt, even, people tell you, I had a couple of people asking me, oh, who should I watch at camp? And Schmidt's an easy guy to point out and say, yeah, well, they just got him. So you're seeing stuff and for the first time, just like me in some ways. So yeah, he's a good guy to watch. And Emil Hemming is the same way. He's got a great shot. He's also got a fair bit of size, and you can see a lot of confidence too. Hemming just didn't seem to have the nerves a lot of other players there did, and he had a couple shots in different drills and things like that where it was clear this is someone who expects to score when he shoots from certain areas and can put the puck in spots that not a lot of other players can. So yeah, Hemming for me, I'm always really, really hesitant to say, oh, I watched this one game or this one practice or this one camp, and now my opinion of this player is completely changed. I'm not nearly qualified to do that. I'm not a scout. But he was really impressive. So to me, Hemming definitely pops, and you can see how good he is. And even I heard from a couple other people there in the organization too, who were just like, yeah, he's fun to watch. You
Yeah.
can see. So Emil Hemming, if you're thinking, oh, he's the first round pick, but he's not, getting all the press and the buzz that Maverick Bork or Stankoven or players like that did, I wouldn't sell him short. I think the Stars have a really good player there. We'll see. Obviously we're kind of waiting to see what happens when he starts, when he leaves juniors and everything like that. But yeah, I think he's a really good player. One other player, and you mentioned him actually. I wrote about him earlier, and we may even have talked about him a little bit. But Trey Taylor is another player. He's a little bit on the older side. He's 23, so there are even some 17-year-old kids in camp. So you would expect some of the older guys to really stick out. But Trey Taylor, as a member of that Texas Stars team that just got done with that deep playoff run, he looks just as impressive as he looked in Texas this year too. When he came on board after he signed with Dallas last year, he'd even been at the Philadelphia Flyers development camp. The Dallas had talked to him about attending their camp last year, but he had already kind of said he would go to the Flyers camp. But credit to Scott White and Rich Peverly and the Stars organization. They ended up convincing Taylor to sign with Dallas, and Taylor was pretty clear with me, at least when he talked about this, that for him it's just about he trusts the organization, and everyone was really upfront with him, and he felt like they were really shooting straight with him. And boy, you can see that it could be a really good mutual fit, at least so far. His transition from college to the AHL, Taylor was playing big minutes on the second pair with Texas, and he looked every bit like a player who had just felt very comfortable and confident after taking a step like that. So yeah, he has to do it for a full season with Texas this next year, but. And Taylor's a left-handed defenseman too, so if you're trying to project like long term, where does Taylor play? I don't know. We're probably not quite to that point yet, but it's good for a team to have good players. And Trey Taylor is certainly looking like a good find. And frankly, when you get an undrafted player and you sign them out of college, if they end up playing any NHL games for you, it's kind of a bonus.
Yeah.
The Stars signed a couple of other players out of college too, but Trey Taylor, so far at least to me, is someone who really is worth keeping an eye on. So I think the Stars got a good one there too.
Back to Hemming for a second, I think it's a good reminder as we are so quick to judge prospects. And David and I were talking about that, David Castillo, and admittedly so, when Hemming first decided, which I think was a very smart move, I'm going to come to North America and play in juniors. Basically his first quarter to half a season, he did not look good. And then the second half, David was pointing out specifics. He just exploded, and that's continued.
Yep.
And that's great to see. Maverick Bourque was the same way when he came to Texas. That first half of his first AHL campaign, Maverick Bourque was struggling a bit and had to learn that league. There is a learning curve between juniors and jumping up, because Maverick Bourque was amazing in junior hockey, and then that adjustment, and then he exploded from there. So maybe we saw Maverick Bourque as far as like this year was kind of a learning curve, and that would be one of the keys to the Stars' success next year, is the emergence of Maverick Bourque to hopefully put up numbers similar to what he was doing in the AHL. So that remains to be seen. But I think we're too quick to call people, failures really quick without, kind of just, and patience is tough because, right, it's just immediacy, especially when you're in the Stars organization, because there's been such a success. Unfortunately, a lot of these players are being penalized based on Stankoven, Wyatt Johnston, players that basically made the jump way too quick. This is very rare what's happening with this organization as far as players either just having a cup of coffee in the minors and coming right up, or just going, in Wyatt Johnston's case, straight up. And if Hemming keeps this up, he's not going to make the team, but I bet Stars fans will be like, why isn't Hemming on this team? The fact is he probably has to go back to juniors.
They've got some, man, the Stars development, you're right. When you look at, how quickly some of these guys have spent time with Texas. And again, it's a big credit to Neil Graham, how they've been able to go there, learn, and then make that transition. Or in some cases, like Thomas Harley, play maybe a little bit more in the NHL earlier than they had planned 3 or 4 years ago. And then go back to Texas, work on some things, successfully work on those things, then come back up to the NHL and thrive as Harley has. So there's every chance that that we'll see that with players down there. Maverick Bourque's an interesting example because this year with Dallas, look, bringing Radek Fox in kind of makes you ask a lot of questions. Yep. I don't think they bring him in and sign him to that 3-year deal if they don't plan on him playing center. So to me, that makes you wonder, okay, who are your centers then? Does that mean Wyatt Johnston isn't necessarily playing center? Does that mean Matt Duchene isn't necessarily going to be playing as much center? Where Maverick Bourque, he's a center. He played a center a little bit under DeBoer, but then they moved him mostly to the wing later in the year. Does that mean Maverick Bourque is going to get another chance to look at center? Does that mean Sam Steele is going to play up the lineup and could he be a stopgap on the left wing up there? I think Glen Gulutzan even said that's something that he definitely is looking at. is moving Steele to wing at least for a little bit, if possible, because he has that kind of skill and speed, so he can keep up with some of those more skilled players. So it's interesting because it's a great opportunity for all those players to take that next step. And I think Bork is a great example of how you can still be doing that at the NHL. Development isn't always linear. We're so kind of spoiled with some of the players that we've watched where they've come up, and just every time we see them, it seems like they're taking that next step and building on all this potential we've heard about. Whether it's been Robertson or Ottinger back in the day, Harley, and then Johnston as a teenager coming right up to from juniors right to the NHL. I mean, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen, especially when you're not picking in the top five, top three of the draft most of the time. So yeah, it's pretty cool and pretty entertaining to see all these kids doing this well. But just because their path isn't linear, like you say, doesn't mean that they're not succeeding at all. It just might mean, Texas is going to need a lot of players too this year. So
Yeah.
they lost Matej Blumel, Ritzkovian might come up to the NHL. There's a few players that are moving on. So a lot of players have opportunities this year, no matter what team they're playing for. They're going to have an opportunity to grow and learn. And that's something they were focused on at development camp too, is, this isn't a fail or succeed week. It's just about taking those skills, building on them. They called it homework. I think both Jordy Ben and Rich Beverly talked about it. That they're giving the players homework to work on for the next year. And then they'll, be checking in on them throughout the season. But it's exciting. It's cool to see a little snapshot of kind of where those players are right now before they go back off. And then, we start looking at box scores again for the next year.
And we might see a gap of a year because a lot of the talent-rich prospects are in junior hockey right now for this organization, partly because of all the success they've had, and so many players are up in Dallas right now. So there's naturally going to be a gap, along with all the trades and the draft picks and everything like that. But just a FYI, which I think is a real good transition because hockey is so rich right now with talent. And I say that because it seems like more often than not, we are all excited about these number one picks. We had Connor Bedard with Chicago, and boy, when he's healthy, he's impressive. Macklin Celebrini did 1 year at Boston University coming into San Jose, and what he showed that he can do, he'll be really interesting to watch. And today, Robert, Gavin McKenna is now what they're calling generational. We've heard that before. But you look at what he did for Medicine Hat last year as a 16/17-year-old. 56 games played, 41 goals, 88 assists in the wing position, 129 points. He has declared with Penn State, so he will be playing, I'm guessing, for a year because he is expected to be the number one pick for the Penn State Nittany Lions. And I wonder if NIL has a little bit to do with this because now GMs actually like players going into the college hockey system because college hockey is so vastly improved compared to what it used to be. So now a lot of GMs are looking at college hockey and looking at the prospects. We just talked about some. So to me, this is fascinating for a program like Penn State. Boy, they were already on the map, playing at a high level, but what a signing today. So the Gavin McKenna watch will be happening from Happy Valley.
An interesting Stars connection there too to McKenna is one of his teammates this last year. You mentioned him putting up those ridiculous numbers in Medicine Hat in the WHL, again with his coach Willie Desjardins being his head coach there.
Great point.
And one of his teammates is another Stars player who was at development camp who also just signed his entry-level deal with Dallas, Nilo-Pekka Muhonen, who's a big defenseman, I think 6'5",
yes,
210, something like that. A big left shot defenseman from Finland. And Muhonen said, I was asking him about McKenna actually last week, and he said, I'm going to get this wrong, going off memory, but he said essentially he's a great player, so you can just watch him. It's amazing. But for him in particular, Muhonen says it makes him a lot better when he can defend people like McKenna during practice because it forces him to really be on his game. Because someone like McKenna can really make you pay if your stick work isn't good, if your gap is bad. So it's a little thing, but the Stars clearly are happy with Muhonen's development under Desjardins, so they signed him to an ELC, and he's coming along well after making the transition over from Finland to North America. So McKenna obviously was also thriving quite a bit under Willie Desjardins too. So him going the college hockey route, like Trey Taylor did and others who've gone to college and made that transition to pro hockey pretty easily. One would suspect McKenna going from juniors to college that he might be able to jump from college either right to the AHL next year, or more likely, what everyone thinks is that McKenna will go right onto an NHL roster next year. The kind of common agreement is that that's not a phrase, but the consensus is that McKenna is gonna, he's much closer to that kind of Connor Bedard generational talent, if not even beyond him. Just one of those really, really special players. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch him there up at Penn to see what he does against bigger players, because instead of juniors now he could be playing against Trey Taylors and guys like that, 22, 23 years old. So it'll be fascinating to see, but you have to give Willie Jardins credit for helping him take that next stage of his development, just like he's done with a lot of other players.
Well, hopefully you do get some rest here and there. It's been such a busy off season and such a long season. And starsthoughts.com is the place to be. As I mentioned, Tate and Trey Taylor article up there, brothers and defense partners in college and now at Stars Development Camp. You talk about development camp, you talk about the coaching, you talk about free agency. There's so much, and you can find it all at starsthoughts.com. And as I mentioned on this program, Robert is an independent reporter, so your support of starsthoughts.com goes a long way. For my money, he's obviously towards the top, and he's nice enough to give us his time on Spits and Suds to deliver unbelievable information. I really love this podcast, Robert. I felt as though we covered so much ground. In July, we're covering this ground. It's absolutely 100% a hockey town, baby.
One of the things I love the most about this podcast, Gavin, that you've created is I remember, following the Stars a long time ago, and there just wasn't this sort of thing. We were scrabbling for whatever content you could find in 2009 or whatever during the off season, and there just wasn't very much. So the fact that we have a show like this where we're getting to have these conversations, I just selfishly, I love them and I really enjoy them too. So I'm glad we get to do this, but it also hopefully is at least, even if people completely disagree with everything I say, at least it's something to talk about during this time. So I think Stars fans are pretty spoiled these days in all the best ways, and you should take a lot of credit for that.
No, well, thank you very much. I tell this story. I went to call Stars fans bluff because they would call the radio station and say, "You don't talk enough Stars." And we have talked a lot more Stars than we have in the past. In fact, the fans trying to get Jim Nill on, and we just continue to talk about, the Stars if anything happens, and have various people on. Robert, you've been great on 105.3 The Fan with my midday show. So we have
it's a fun show. Yeah,
it's a fun show. Absolutely. So we have upped our coverage on The Fan, but prior to that, I said, when people would complain, I said, I'm going to start a podcast. None of you are going to listen. And then I'm going to call your bluff and say, well, you know what? I did a Stars only podcast. I gave you the information you need and nobody listened. Well, years later, here we are talking about Stars Development Camp. So kudos to Stars fans, and it's been a terrific ride along the way. You've been a huge part of it, man. I'm so thankful to you, David, Sean, just everyone involved, Steven, Leah, just everyone that comes on. Taylor's come on, Mike Heika. You guys do such a great job covering. There's so many people now that cover the Stars in different perspectives. Absolutely wonderful. And thank you for all the information we got. Like I said, I'm amazed in July that we're covering all these subjects. There's so much to talk about and more to come.
We're all spoiled, and I'm really grateful that none of us have to shoulder the burden alone, because people would be in very sorry state if I was the only one they had to go to for Stars news. So I couldn't be happier to be part of the tapestry that you've woven together.
You're a terrific part of it, my friend. Thanks again. Robert Tiffin, starsthoughts.com, at Robert Tiffin on X/Twitter. We'll have another episode of Spits and Suds soon as we roll through the summer. Until then, have a great day, everyone, and thank you so much for support, and thank you so much for listening to Spits and Suds.